What I'm about to show you isn't just a chapter from a history book. It's a secret code used to decide who deserved to live and who deserved to die. A system that promised to read people like an open book simply by measuring their skull. And the most terrifying part, its ghost still walks among us. Are you ready to discover how the shape of a head could send someone to the gallows? Picture this: the 19th century, a dusty courtroom. The defendant's tense face. The prosecutor calls not a witness, but a man in a sharp suit carrying a satchel. He pulls out a special instrument, a craniometer, and approaches the accused, lending his actions the air of a precise medical procedure. The jury holds its breath. The phrenologist takes his measurements and declares, "Gentlemen, this man's organ of destructiveness is developed to 7 out of 7. His guilt is predetermined by nature itself." But how did the world ever descend into such an absurdity? People desperately wanted to believe they could measure and predict the human soul. This desire led to catastrophic consequences. We'll explore how this science was born in the mind of one genius, or madman, and how it captivated the world, transforming into a pop culture phenomenon. Most importantly, we'll uncover which of its dangerous ideas have survived to this day, hiding in our smartphones under a new code name, digital phrenology. It all began with one man, Franz Joseph Gall, an Austrian physician from the late 18th century. He observed that classmates with good memories often had prominent eyes. This simple observation sparked a chain reaction, leading him to create an entire map of the soul on the surface of the head. Gall called this particular feature the organ of verbal memory, laying the first, seemingly scientific cornerstone of his theory. This is what he ultimately proposed. Before you is the symbol of his theory, the phrenological bust. Gall asserted that the brain wasn't a single organ, but a collection of 27, and later even more, distinct mental organs. Each was responsible for a specific trait: cunning, poetic talent, even a propensity for murder. The more developed an organ, the larger its size. And this size, Gall claimed, literally protruded outward, creating a bump on the skull. Ingeniously simple. The classifications were astounding. Philoprogenitiveness, love of offspring; concentrativeness, the ability to focus; and amativeness, carnal love, your entire personality mapped onto your head. A phrenology session was akin to a ritual. Special instruments were employed: craniometers for general measurements, calipers for precise spot measurements, and tapes to record proportions. The specialist, with the demeanor of a surgeon, methodically palpated the client's head, measuring bumps and depressions, then delivered a verdict. It was like visiting a doctor and a fortune teller simultaneously, imbuing the process with an aura of both science and mysticism. Ultimately, the client received a phrenological chart, essentially the world's first standardized personality test, the great-grandfather of all modern "which fruit are you?" quizzes. To grasp the full depth of this delusion, one only needs to look at some of the strangest organs. The organ of love for animals. The organ of faith in God, which naturally was located at the very crown of the head, closer to the heavens, or the organ of wit on the forehead. This is akin to determining your computer's processing power by measuring the temperature of different parts of its casing. Phrenology related to true neurology, much like astrology relates to astronomy. It took a real object, the brain, but invented entirely fantastical rules for it. Now, try a simple experiment. Feel your skull just behind your ears. Do you feel a bony protrusion? Phrenologists would have called that the organ of combativeness. And now, the area at the back of your head, that's the organ of inhabitiveness, attachment to home. According to Gall's logic, you could be feeling your strengths and weaknesses right now. Absurd, yes, but also tempting, isn't it? This very organ of combativeness, phrenologists claimed, was particularly developed in soldiers and savage races, immediately revealing how easily this system descended into prejudice. But the main allure of phrenology wasn't even in diagnosis, it promised correction. Phrenologists claimed that weak organs could be trained like muscles, while overly active ones could be suppressed by willpower. This was the concept of a mental gym. Don't like your bump of acquisitiveness. Do more exercises in generosity. This idea of self-improvement was incredibly attractive during an era of progress. It gave people the illusion of complete control over their destiny, and this illusion proved so contagious that it soon swept across the globe. Phrenology became the first scientific pop culture phenomenon. Lecturers toured cities, analyzing volunteers from the audience to thunderous applause. Books with titles like Know Thyself by the Shape of Your Skull became bestsellers, and ceramic busts marked with phrenological divisions became fashionable home decor, much like motivational posters today. Even Queen Victoria invited a phrenologist to read her children's heads, and the great poet Walt Whitman was a staunch supporter of this science. But this pop culture had a dark utilitarian side. It returned to where we began. The courtroom. Italian physician Cesare Lombroso took Gall's ideas and used them to create criminal anthropology. He asserted that criminals weren't a product of society, but a distinct biological type identifiable by skull shape. Lombroso called these features atavistic stigmata, low foreheads, large jaws, asymmetrical faces. In his view, these were evolutionary throwbacks to a wild, primitive human. His drawings of typical murderers and thieves transformed justice into zoology. Your guilt was written on your face even before you committed a crime. From classifying criminals, it was just one step to classifying entire peoples. This marks the darkest chapter in phrenology's history. Scientists worldwide began measuring skulls to prove the superiority of the European race. American physician Samuel Morton, in his work Crania Americana, amassed a vast collection of skulls. To measure their volume, he filled them with lead shot, then poured it into a measuring cup. The conclusion was predictable. Caucasians had the largest brains and thus the highest intelligence. Other peoples, he claimed, had more developed animalistic organs. This became a convenient scientific justification for colonialism and slavery. Years later, it was revealed that Morton had simply manipulated his results. Now, imagine living in that era. You're looking for a job, and instead of a resume, your employer asks you to undergo a phrenological examination. You're denied because your organ of conscientiousness is deemed underdeveloped. Or you want to marry, and your fiancé's parents demand a phrenological compatibility chart to ensure your organ of inhabitiveness is sufficiently large. This wasn't fantasy. Personal life, career, education, everything came under the scrutiny of calipers and measuring tape. While some built theories of national cleansing on these ideas, others simply made money from them. In the U.S., entire phrenological publishing houses, like Fowler and Wells, published best-selling magazines and books. It was a large and profitable business, capitalizing on the human desire for self-knowledge and the elimination of chance from life. Parents took their children to phrenologists to determine their future calling, turning upbringing into a kind of factory calibration. If inferiority could be measured, a terrifying idea emerged. Could society be cleansed of undesirable people? Phrenology wasn't the father of eugenics, but it was the midwife that helped this monstrous idea come to life, handing it a scientific birth certificate. It provided a pseudoscientific basis for future programs of forced sterilization and even genocide. It was a dead end built on a foundation of lies, and soon that foundation began to crack. But phrenology's most devastating impact wasn't on individuals. It provided a weapon for entire systems of oppression. In the U.S., it was actively used to justify slavery. Scientific treatises were published, claiming that the skulls of Africans indicated inherent submissiveness and a lack of intelligence. Therefore, their natural state was one of subjugation. This didn't just break one life, it crippled the destinies of millions, all under the guise of objective science. However, the scientific community viewed this with deep suspicion from the outset. Gall's chief adversary, French physiologist Pierre Flourens, entered the scene. He publicly denounced phrenology as charlatanism and prepared his rebuttal. It was a clash of two worlds, a beautiful but false theory versus messy but truthful experimental science. The skeptics even had heavy artillery, Napoleon Bonaparte himself, upon meeting Gall, called his doctrine a science for fools that turned man into a slave of his innate nature. Florenz didn't argue with eloquent words. He picked up a scalpel. In his laboratory, he methodically removed specific brain sections from pigeons and rabbits, then observed the results. What would happen if the organ of combativeness was removed? The bird didn't become a pacifist. It lost coordination. Removing other parts led to loss of sight or balance, but not specific character traits. He discovered the principle of the brain's general action. This meant the brain wasn't a cabinet with 27 drawers, but a single complex orchestra. Removing one musician didn't silence one melody. It disrupted the harmony of the entire piece. Let's introduce a hypothetical credibility scale. The idea that the brain influences behavior. 10 out of 10, that's pure truth. The idea that different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. 8 out of 10. This also proved true, but not in the way Gall imagined. Paul Broca's 1861 discovery of the brain region responsible for speech confirmed the principle of localization of function. But this was localization within the brain, not on the skull. It's like finding the right file on a hard drive, while phrenologists were trying to find it by feeling the computer's casing. As for the idea that bumps on the skull could reveal anything about the brain, 0 out of 10. Phrenology took a grain of truth and built a castle of lies upon it. But the final nail in phrenology's coffin was hammered in by pathologists. When famous individuals whose heads had been meticulously studied by phrenologists during their lives died, their skulls were opened. And beneath the bone, there was nothing that corresponded to the bumps on the surface. The brain did not replicate the skull's contours. This simple anatomical fact shattered the entire system to its core. It turned out that the skull wasn't a thin glove mirroring the hand-like brain. It was more like a thick boxing glove, offering only a very general idea of what lay within, but completely concealing all the details. The most vivid symbol of this self-deception was the story of the great philosopher René Descartes' skull. For decades, phrenologists studied it, finding irrefutable proof of genius, well-developed organs of comparison, and metaphysical spirit. It was used as the benchmark skull of a thinker. Then it was discovered that it wasn't his skull at all. It belonged to someone else. This curious incident revealed the core truth. Phrenologists weren't measuring reality. They were simply finding confirmation for what they already believed. By the early 20th century, phrenology had definitively reverted to what it always was, a parlor amusement, on par with reading tea leaves. The scientific world had moved far ahead, leaving it in the dustbin of history, but its ideas didn't die. They went underground, like retroviruses, embedding their code into the DNA of our culture, only to re-emerge at the most unexpected moment. And that moment has arrived. The ghost of phrenology has returned under the name of its younger sibling, physiognomy. The ideas that a high forehead signifies intelligence, or a strong chin indicates a powerful character. We still use these stereotypes without even thinking. Consider how, in dating apps, we read a person from a photo in a fraction of a second, deciding whether to swipe left or right. It's the same attempt to guess character from appearance, only on the steroids of speed and technology. But now it possesses more powerful weapons. We've replaced the caliper with an algorithm and the phrenological bust with a neural network. This is digital phrenology. Today, AI systems exist that analyze videos of job candidates and deliver verdicts on their reliability or team spirit. In 2019, a scandal erupted around the company HireVue, which used artificial intelligence to analyze video interviews. The algorithm evaluated facial expressions and intonations to predict candidate success. After a barrage of criticism comparing it to phrenology, the company abandoned facial analysis. But Pandora's box had already been opened. This craving for simple labels hasn't disappeared. We judge people by their social media avatars. We love taking tests that reduce complex personalities to one of 16 types. The popularity of the Myers-Briggs type indicator is a prime example. Although the scientific community criticizes it for low reliability, millions use it to understand themselves and others. we still desperately want a simple and easily understandable personality map. Recall how many times you've made a snap judgment about someone after just a glance, or taken another online test to better understand yourself. This is the ghost of phrenology in our minds, the desire to package complex reality into a simple, convenient box. Psychologists call this cognitive simplification. Our brains are lazy. They always seek the shortest path. And phrenology, like its digital descendants, offers the most tempting route to understanding others. Therefore, the history of phrenology isn't merely a curious anecdote. It's an eternal warning about the dangers of pseudoscience, especially when it promises simple answers to complex questions and begins to divide people into right and wrong. So how can you protect your mind from modern phrenologists? Here's a simple 3-step filter, your personal charlatan detector. First, the simplicity filter. Any system that promises to package the entire complexity of a human into a couple of skull bumps, 4 personality-type letters, or an analysis of your facial expression in a video is lying. Human nature isn't a Lego set, it's a raging ocean. Second, the evidence filter. Always ask one question. Where are the reproducible, independent experiments? If all you hear in response are pretty stories, glowing testimonials, and references to the founder's intuition, you're facing deception. True science isn't afraid of scrutiny. And third, the most important, the labeling filter. As soon as a theory starts dividing people into born, this or that, criminals, geniuses, leaders, run. A person is a process, not a sentence carved in bone. They are capable of change. Because the history of phrenology is the story of one colossal mistake. But what truly fueled it? Was it a sincere, albeit naive, human quest for self-understanding? A desperate attempt to bring order to the chaos of the world and find one's place within it? Or was it, from the very beginning, a cold and cynical tool of control, designed to justify injustice and permanently entrench the existing order of things? In other words, was it a heartfelt error or a calculated crime? What truly drove this machine, hope or power? Write just one word in the comments, quest or control. Let's see what you think played a larger role in our history.